Hello, my possibly Glasgow curious peeps. This is Kat, aka Kakibot, and welcome to the Kakibot Conversation Corner. Today with Jana, my Glaswegian friend. So you've been here for over 2 years now,
Yep.
right? On a scale from 0 to 10, how Glaswegian do you feel right now?
Ooh, 6.5.
That's pretty good.
Maybe going on 7.
That's enough for this channel. So my thinking was, a lot of you send me messages about moving to Scotland, and often you really dream about moving to Edinburgh, but maybe you should consider Glasgow as well, because there is a lot that Glasgow has going for it. And today we're going to be doing kind of a realistic comparison of the two cities, the costs, the safety, the vibe, and all of that with a pal who actually has lived here and experienced all of this firsthand. So let's start with the general vibe. If you had to describe Glasgow in 3 words, which words would those be?
I would say green, Scottish, and fun.
Nice. Do you think, I mean, you've spent some time in Edinburgh as well. On the Scottishness scale, how long do you have to be in Edinburgh to actually experience some Scottishness?
Oh, great question. Yeah, I didn't spend that long in Edinburgh in any one chunk, and I think I tend to gravitate towards the Scottish thing, so the likes of the Scottish Storytelling Centre, which has a lot of very Scottish and Gaelic focused programming going on. But overall, I feel like the vibe of Edinburgh is very sort of international, which is great, but it's very different from the vibe of Glasgow, which is very Scottish focused. So I think here immediately the Scottishness hits you, whereas in Edinburgh you get the pretty castle-y, Hogwartsy aesthetic, but maybe less very Scottish vibe.
Yeah, it does feel like there's that sort of Instagrammable layer, and people sometimes ask me when they've never been to Edinburgh, they say, oh, it looks so good on social media, surely it's not as good looking in real life, but it is. Yeah. But with that comes that sort of almost like a Disneyfication of the city, where when you move there, unless you do put some actual effort into it, you might get stuck in that sort of outer layer of experiencing the city in a very a social media friendly way. Obviously it depends on which part of Edinburgh you move into. I think that there are parts of Edinburgh that are on par with Glasgow when it comes to how kind of rawly Scottish they feel. But in Glasgow, even when you just visit for a couple of days, you feel a lot of that authentic quality much more immediately. I think that one thing that people worry a lot about when coming to Glasgow or considering Glasgow as a place to live is the safety, because it has a bit of a bad name.
Yeah, so there is, I think, the sort of old myth circulating of Glasgow being unsafe and violent, and I think it's really unfortunate that that myth survives. There might be a bit of a feeling of, the cities in general can be quite dirty, and Glasgow's yeah, there's a litter problem, and there might be some sort of a aesthetic roughness to it, which I think a lot of people might interpret as sketchy or unsafe, and that is just not my lived experience of Glasgow at all. I guess the sort of most dangerous thing that can happen to you is your bike gets nicked, or if you're on the subway and a football game is on, you might just get squeezed between a lot of guys going to the game. But even when there's sort of roughness and rowdiness going on, yeah, there's a lot of fun and drinking and partying, it is still done with a very good vibe sort of a thing. There's the famous Glasgow banter and patter. So I've not ever felt unsafe in Glasgow, and actually my bike didn't get nicked ever, so yay, knock on wood. So yeah, I think it is a safe city as any other European one, and with the added benefit of people being really friendly and really good and really helpful. So yeah.
So could that be simply that Edinburgh natives are not necessarily more closed off, but I mean they are socially a bit more conservative, so maybe when you're used to that from Edinburgh, it might feel a bit intimidating at first when you come to Glasgow, and suddenly you're automatically part of that crowd that's very loud and vibrant.
Yeah, it could be. And I also think sometimes people interpret the accent as a bit like a little rougher or something, which is just very much a cultural difference. And there's nothing sinister behind it at all, of course.
So speaking of accent, because like we both moved here from a non-English speaking country, how easy or hard do you find it to decipher the Glaswegian accent or accents?
There's many accents for sure. It takes a little bit of practice. I would just say you just have to go for it, and it'll get better. And there's quite a lot of sounds that came from Gaelic, because Glasgow has historically been a very sort of Highland and Island Gaels moving to Glasgow, so there's a lot of sounds coming from that are quite different from Edinburgh or certainly elsewhere in Scotland or the UK. So it's just fascinating, and it is quite different, but you do get better at it eventually. I don't think I sound Glaswegian in any manner at all, but yeah, it's doable for sure. Don't be intimidated by it.
Are there any good like Glaswegian slang terms that you think would be helpful to know for people who are coming? And let's keep it family friendly.
I was just gonna say, well, I'd have to think about that a bit more. But there's the classic of how do you take your tea? It's like milk and two, milk and two bits of sugar, or something like that. And there are definitely words and phrases that are Scots or Gaelic influenced. I think there are actual little Glasgow dictionaries you can look up. So yep.
Now towards more like practical things, let's start with the cost of living here.
1 bedroom in Glasgow is something like 600-ish, whereas in Edinburgh it's like 770. And then 2 bedrooms in Glasgow would go probably for about 800. There would be like more and less expensive areas, like anywhere again. But the rent seems to be the sort of biggest difference between Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Yeah, you mentioned that there isn't actually many like apartments to be let in the city center here. That's not a very residential area, right?
Yeah, so I think quite often when people visit, you are in the city center, which is sort of George Square and the train station. It's encircled by a highway, and it's very officey. And yeah, there's a lot of offices, a lot of businesses, but not that many people actually living in there, and so you need to venture past the city center to get to the residential areas.
What about student accommodation? Like Edinburgh has so much student accommodation. It's like whenever you're walking around Edinburgh and you see something being built, it's never anything exciting. It's always student accommodation.
Same.
Okay, so that's good. I did think it was just a very Edinburgh-specific city planning plague.
Oh, there are a couple.
Yeah?
Yeah. And it's always the sort of glass front, tall things that have absolutely zero character to them.
Work-wise, because this is another question I get quite a lot when people are considering moving to Glasgow, or like they are not quite decided and they're interested in what sort of kind of like industries and businesses are centered around Glasgow. Earlier we were talking about this a bit, and you did mention that a lot of big companies are kind of making a move out of London towards Glasgow, and Glasgow could be like another sort of center of business and like banking outside of London.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of banking going on in the city centre, and Barclays just moved their large headquarter to the Clyde, which is the river in Glasgow. So that's a huge new campus that just got built. But I guess other than that, there's also all the universities. So there's sort of academic and research positions, and a good amount of technology going on at some of the universities. Healthcare is also a big sector in Glasgow because we're home to a lot of big hospitals and the biggest NHS board. So it's not just clinical, but also all sort of care and support and scientific jobs. And then Glasgow's really sort of big on the arts and the creative scene. So that could be visual and performing arts, and certainly a lot of music as well. and because of the Glasgow School of Art, a lot of sort of young creatives congregate in Glasgow.
That's one of the things that even after only visiting Glasgow like 3 times at this point, I did notice it immediately how so like Edinburgh's art scene is quite like a bit hoity-toity, while the Glaswegian one seems a lot more like, you know, like people's art. It's more fun, kind of more organic.
And there's quite a lot of just performing and visual arts venues as well. So there's a ton of galleries and tons of theaters and concert venues, just sort of really everywhere in the city. So I think that kind of enables the loads of things to spring up, and there's a lot of sort of free events and free exhibitions, which I, as a more of a consumer than maker of art, find really great because, you know, you can just always find something going on.
You sound like you do quite a lot of kind of like workshops and sort of DIY things. You seem to be like taking up a lot of interesting hobbies. Like what is the latest one?
Oh yeah, stained glass. So here in the south side, there's quite a lot of spaces like that where you can do creative things, and they're often social enterprises, meaning that it's, you know, someone employed there to enable people to do something with their hands as a form of, you know, community building or just having fun and, you know, supporting mental well-being. This is actually a co-op of artists who just make traditional stained glass, which is a very Glaswegian form of art. And there's just so many of these things, and there's various community gardens and allotments where people can get involved. So yeah, it's just all over the place. It's great.
So culture-wise, I think a lot of people, they think like I should visit or move to Edinburgh because there's so many galleries and museums, and I think maybe they don't realize that Glasgow has almost just as many. There's just so much to see.
We got the Riverside Museum, which is a museum of transport, and I'm not into cars, but I was like, whoa, it's a wall full of old cars and boats, and they have a tall ship on the river. You've got the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery, which has a bit of sort of older medieval art, and as well as all the way to contemporary art. You've got the modern art gallery, you've got the People's Palace, you've got the Scotland Street School Museum, you've got the Burrell Collection, which are all free and really fantastic venues. And then there's smaller ones, various like photography venues. There's a contemporary dance venue quite close to us. So yeah, loads going on. In
Edinburgh, obviously, we get the festival season, and during that, there's just so much sort of like performance arts going on and theatre. But I do always feel like outside of August, there's like nothing going on. There's when it comes to theatre, I think, especially compared to Prague, where like you have theatre going on all the time. And I was wondering if Glasgow is maybe doing better at that.
Yeah, well, I know it's home to Scottish Ballet. I'm not sure about Scottish Opera. I think it might be as well. So there's that going through the year, but then it's also sort of, you know, touring of companies throughout the UK that might come to Glasgow. I guess Glasgow's the fringe equivalent might be Celtic Connections, which is a festival at the end of January, beginning of February. It's about 3 weeks of you know, thousands of musicians coming through, a lot of traditional Scottish and Irish music, but also then drawing connections to areas in Canada and the States and France, as well as expanding to quite a lot of what I guess would be called world music. So that is like the fantastic event, and it doesn't get anywhere as crowded as during Fringe. Like it's not really an equivalent, but that's sort of my favorite big festival that goes on in Glasgow.
So one thing that I just realized we haven't touched upon yet is the weather, and we are sitting here on like an immensely beautiful day, which
They do happen.
So like this year we had so many like hot spells. Did that come to Glasgow at all?
There was a heat wave as well, and it can get quite muggy.
I find like based on my visits, it always felt like in Glasgow it always rains, and in Edinburgh it's always windy. So if you're deciding between the two, you basically have to decide like which one is the lesser evil.
Pick your poison.
Yeah. I mean, it's not gonna be a good hair day in either.
Yeah. West Coast, it's wet and rainy.
Are there any upsides on being on the West Coast?
Yeah, well, so the proximity to the sea, we obviously don't have sea in the city, but it's very easy to hop on a train and get to a Calmac ferry in 45 minutes and get to Isle of Bute or Arran, as well as sort of going up farther north on the west coast. It takes about 3 hours to get to Oban, which is the sort of gateway to the islands. So the proximity to the sea and the Western Highlands is really a big bonus because it's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous and stunning.
And it does really like affect how you spend your days off depending on which coast you choose to live in, because for us, we are very used to visiting all those East Coast cities. You have like St Andrews and Dundee, and like Fife in general, and even like East Lothian, which is beautiful. And it would be really interesting to like stay in Glasgow for an extended period of time and see what sort of it offers in terms of connectivity to other parts of Scotland. I mean, you just really sold it to me. Like, it sounds great.
And there's you can cycle to Loch Lomond, and there's a segregated cycle path going all the way there from the city.
How far away is that?
I think it's about 20 kilometers.
That's okay.
And it's maybe not even, and it's really flat. It's a really nice bit, so you get to Loch Lomond right like that. Or honestly, you can hop on any ScotRail or Citylink and just like within an hour of heading out of the city, you can go and walk up a Munro.
What about the city public transport? You guys have the underground.
Yeah, so Glasgow's got the subway, which runs in a circle of 15 stops. It is very cute. I'm not sure if it's the world's smallest, but I think it might be. It is tiny. If you live close to the subway, it is great, because the fare is about, if you have sort of a card, it's £1.55 a ride or something, and it's capped every day at £3. So that is really handy. It doesn't really run that many places, so it serves the city centre and West and Partick and Govan and a tiny bit of Southside, which we're very lucky to be close to. But for a majority of the city, it's just not there. So there is a network of buses that are run by sort of private operators, which do exist, but they're more expensive than Edinburgh. I think a ride is like $2.50 or something.
Really?
Yeah, and they are not very dependable. And during the pandemic, the services have been cut back and not really restored. So that is something the city is working on, and hopefully at some point moving to sort of an integrated system of travel where you can tap out on the subway and the bus and maybe the local trains and just be still on the same fare, but that is like ways in the future. The trains are a pretty good service within Glasgow because it is quite large, so you've got sort of the light rail that makes a lot of stops in the city centre, but then the sort of more outlying areas and suburbs. So the train is actually really handy to have in Glasgow. And it is pretty cyclable, I would say. But I'm a keen cyclist, and you do sort of have to learn to live with the car driving culture, which is mighty in Glasgow. But there's, again, like construction of more segregated cycle paths. And it is a little bit hilly, but at least it's not cobbled like Edinburgh.
Yeah. Well, when we were driving into Glasgow, it did feel like it is a more car-friendly city than Edinburgh, which makes me a bit worried about like walkableness, because Edinburgh feels so extremely walkable. Like for me, I would always say that unless you live really like well outside of the city center, you don't need a car, and you honestly don't need to use the public transport either, because like the most dependable way of getting anywhere is really walking. Because just like you mentioned in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, the buses, I don't find them dependable, but I'm coming into it with a lot of like a very high standard from Prague. But people in the comment section always fight me on that, but they don't know how great we have it in Prague. So yeah, how about the walkableness?
Yeah, so it's obviously a lot bigger than Edinburgh. So, if you live somewhere farther out of the city centre, it might be an hour's walk into the city centre. But that said, with that big size comes quite a lot of sort of centres of gravity kind of a thing. So you don't necessarily always need to go into the city centre because there's probably going to be a big high street and a park and schools and doctors' surgeries and everything in your neighbourhood. So I think there's quite a lot of, and that is Glasgow's goal, to have 20-minute neighbourhoods where you can walk to sort of everything you need within 20 minutes. It's not yet quite the case, but I feel like it is pretty doable in most bits. So like when we're in Southside, I don't really go into the city center because, you know, why would I? I've got the things I need here. But yeah, the highway runs very much through the city center, and that is a known issue. It doesn't necessarily impede your ability to walk from here into the city center at all, because there's still going to be, you know, a big sidewalk and everything. It just might make it a little unpleasant because you're very close to the cars and it can be quite loud.
For contrast, Edinburgh definitely feels quite unfriendly towards car owners, especially, again, the closer you live to the city center, the more you're getting that sort of council vibe of we don't really want you to have a car. So again, like whatever you find to be more comfortable for you and your family, you can kind of pick between the two cities. I guess that each one caters to a slightly different type of transportation. But it's good to know that even in Glasgow, you can still walk places.
Yeah. And get around without a car fairly easily.
And it seems like you have quite a lot of green spaces as well. I mean, you said green as one of the 3 words to describe Glasgow.
And Glasgow, the name coming from Glasgow, which is Gaelic for the green space. Which it is.
When it comes to like neighborhoods in Glasgow, are there any that you would say are like objectively less safe?
There might be sort of areas that are a bit more of the extended center, sort of farther out. But yeah, not necessarily. They might just have sort of like less nice housing, you know, like they might be council houses, and that's fine, you know.
So when it comes to living here or visiting here, one thing that people might also be interested is like where to go out for food, like what is the food scene like? And the thing is, when I first moved to Edinburgh, it was a case of Glasgow had everything and we had nothing. Like this city had all the good food places and they basically expanded into Edinburgh. I think that these days it's kind of like on par with each other. I think like some places start in Edinburgh and expand into Glasgow. Although you guys have Tim Hortons, so.
I rest my case.
So you win.
I think there's sort of a bit of everything. Again, like it's a big city, and it's a city with like a long, vibrant history of immigration. So you'll get sort of all the world's cuisines that you could ask for. I guess Glasgow is specifically famous for its curry, the curry capital of Europe. Maybe it's Manchester. I don't know. Glasgow's, you know, got all the curries. So loads of South and Southeast Asian food. And yeah, I think you get everything sort of from like the humble breakfast roll, which is a staple of Glaswegian cuisine, and it is great. All the way through to Michelin stars, of which I think there are multiples in Glasgow now.
So is there any other like people's cuisine that you would recommend visitors to try when they're in Glasgow?
Definitely the breakfast rolls, you know. I mean, it's a bun. Go for the crusty roll. I would recommend the crusty roll, and you can get any of fillings of like fried anything, eggs, sausages, haggis, bacon, and loads of places now do like vegan haggis and vegan sausages, and tatty scones and stuff like that. So that is the sort of like, it'll set you back all of like £2, and it's gonna be the perfect start to your day.
I think that with this breakfast roll tip, we can probably finish this video. Thank you so much for joining me for this video.
Thanks for coming to Glasgow.
I really want to put more time and effort towards coming to Glasgow more often. It's it's so close. Like it's an hour away from Edinburgh. I think that if you do live in Edinburgh, you should be coming to Glasgow on a semi-regular basis. For us, usually in the past it happened because we were coming for a gig, or you know, there was like an exhibition I really wanted to see, something like that. So like at the very least, keep an eye on what's going on in Glasgow. There might even be some cool like, you know, cooperative classes, like art things that you could partake in. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Don't forget that you can always visit me on social media, on Instagram under Kakibot for my art, Kakiblog for my photography and life in Edinburgh, and also on TikTok, also Kakibot. Is there anywhere you would want people to visit you on social media?
No, just come to Glasgow.
Okay, that is truly it from the two of us. We are now gonna go out and have some Indian food for lunch, and we're gonna show you all about that in our other video about Glasgow, and we will see you soon.
Bye!